Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Gwilda Wiyaka's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the Science of Magic or endorsed in any manner by Gwilda Wiyaka, rel-mar Media Company, its affiliated networks, stations, or employees. Welcome to the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, a program dedicated to uncovering the unified nature of reality and humanity's ever-evolving place as truly galactic beings. For more information on the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit us online at www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Welcome to the Science of Magic, a place where science and magic come together to transform fact into evolving truth. We're coming to you through the leader in responsible paranormal programming, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net, and can also be found on our website, thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour we'll be exploring Nothing New Under the Sun. As the host of the Science of Magic Radio, I've really come to appreciate the necessity of science and magic, or spirituality, coming together. I truly believe the next step in our evolution depends on it. Over recent years, both factions have become polarized, diametrically opposed, and dogmatic. Any practice or structure that polarizes is acting in opposition and unable to evolve into higher understanding. If we're in opposition to something, we refuse to embrace any part of the practice, regardless of its merit. Science has inadvertently tried to invalidate spirituality simply because their instrumentation is too coarse to measure it. Science tends to worship at the holy grail of scientific testing, while proof of the observer effect has rendered their tests invalid. The observer effect states that outcome of the test is affected by the expectation of the observer. Expectation is an invisible influence, thus occult and ignored by scientific materialism. At the same time, many religions have become so dogmatic as to require checking one's rational mind at the door of the church. Some teachings are not in alignment with proven historical facts. The banning of any spiritual practice, not that of the church, is almost universal among religions, including many Christian faiths. Yet, as a young man, prior to his ministry, Jesus reportedly studied in Egypt at the Library of Alexandria, where he focused upon the teachings of all religions of the world, recognizing a universal deity. Interstage left, the New Age movement. There's a great fascination with near-death experiences, spirit, meditation, yoga, channeling, psychic phenomena, and all manner of the occult. But the scientific approach is often shunned to the detriment of the practice. Many New Age practices have pulled from multiple forms without regard to the checks and balances present in the original structure. There's a logic and a flow to the ancient modalities that fit with the laws of nature. In absence of the rational mind, we are unable to discern when we step out of natural flow in our practice. This propagates dabbling, sometimes with disastrous results. The checks and balances created when we blend spirituality and science can keep both forms clean. This approach is not new. The ancient Greek philosophers were open-minded and insightful, studying many different esoteric traditions with an amazingly rational approach. In so doing, they embraced both science and spirituality. In recent times, we see that science has embraced scientific materialism to the exclusion of spirituality. Just as some New Age practices disregard the importance of mastery, due process, and logic. There are many indigenous stories about Great Spirit casting the nations to the four corners of the world. In these prophetic tales, each of the four nations carried a piece of the truth that would be brought back together during these very times. It was stated that if any one of the bodies of knowledge were not returned or incorporated, the foretold evolution of consciousness could not take place. We sequence in and out of periods of unity and polarization. This rhythm is inherent in our cyclic passages through the ages. We're in the process of leaving a polarized era and entering into one of unity. It's time to bring the segregated practices back together. Evolutionary truth is found in agreement and unity, not polarized differences. As individuals and as cultures, we each carry a vital part of the puzzle, absolutely necessary to the whole. Because of the cyclic nature of the ages and what they support, there's much to be uncovered about our future by studying ancient philosophies and practices. However, history is not my strong point. Fortunately, our next guest has compiled some amazing information on the wisdom and mysticism of ancient Greek philosophers. Our guest this hour is Linda Johnsen, the author of The Lost Masters. After this commercial break, I'll introduce Linda, and together we'll delve into the rise and fall of spirituality over the ages. So don't go away. You're listening to The Science of Magic, thescienceofmagic.net. The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Linda Johnsen, author of The Lost Masters. She has a master's degree in Eastern Studies and postgraduate work in History of Religions. She's the author of 8 books on spirituality, including Daughters of the Goddess, The Woman Saints of India, and The Complete Idiot's Guide to Hinduism. Her website is lostmasters.com. Linda, thank you so much for joining us on The Science of Magic.
Gwilda, thanks for having me here to talk about my favorite subject in the world.
It's my understanding that the ancient Greek philosophers didn't see a conflict between spirituality and science. Why was that?
Well, let me just say that, like most other people on the planet, I always thought that the ancient Greeks were about as relevant to our lives today as bows and arrows. But when I started researching the original Greek sources, I was astonished to find how much the Greeks had in common with spiritual speakers today. You know, we're always told, the ancient Greeks were the founders of our modern materialistic scientific tradition. But what they tell us about themselves is they were intensely interested in spirituality. Many of them believed in karma and reincarnation, and a lot of them were vegetarian. They meditated. They studied near-death experiences. They fought for animal rights. They tried to understand God and the nature of their own souls. In antiquity, people thought of the Greek philosophers not as eccentric old men who wrote boring books no one wants to read, like we think of them today. They were thought of as sages, as spiritual teachers. You know, many of the Greek sages, like from Heraclitus in the 5th century BC to Proclus in the 5th century AD, were deeply engaged in spiritual life. I never heard about that in school. I took a course in the ancient Greeks in college. I never heard about any of this. The Greeks had a very rational approach to spirituality, but they did not consider metaphysical subjects to be off limits the way that a lot of scientific types do today, Gwilda.
Well, what do you think led to our modern day segregation between science and spirituality?
Well, first, I actually have a deeply Christian background. But the more I read in antiquity, there are things about Christian history that really break my heart. And with the rise of Christianity, there were some extreme zealots who remind us of some of the real zealots in Islam today, who were setting out to exterminate any tradition that was a rival of their own. So, as you know, Christianity dominated through the Middle Ages. And then at the time of the Renaissance, the Greek texts were rediscovered again. And but then what happened? There was this huge reaction during a period called the Enlightenment, a really kind of, in many ways, like anti-religion movement, because people were so fed up with the thought police that had been imposed by my own religion, by Christianity. And so much of this information was lost. I mean, it was heartbreaking to read. We always hear about the rise of Christianity from a Judeo-Christian perspective, but reading the ancient Greek sources, you hear about Christian zealots burning libraries. And in those days, I mean, books were handwritten. They were, like, invaluable. This was the knowledge of antiquity being burned. And pagans would run into the libraries to try to save their books. And some of these zealots would lock the libraries with the pagans inside and burn them alive with their books. There was such determination to exterminate these traditions. And so now we've gone to the exact opposite extreme with scientific materialism, where there's just a complete closed-minded attitude towards spiritual aspects of life, which we did not find at all with most of the founders of the scientific tradition, who, I'm hoping you're going to let me tell our listeners about.
Who were the founders? Okay, that begs asking.
Let's begin at the beginning, like with Pythagoras. This was the guy who invented the theorem that we learned in math class, Pythagorean theorem. But what we don't learn is he actually founded a hugely successful spiritual community in Italy. This was around 600 BC. His followers meditated, they ate no meat, they drank no alcohol, they worked out every day, they practiced music therapy, and they tried to reach a state of enlightenment. Pythagoras spent decades studying with spiritual masters in Egypt, in Syria, in Persia, and possibly, according to one ancient source, even with Hindu Brahmins. And get this, his first teacher was Thales. And if the name Thales rings a bell for any of you, that's because he was the one we learned in grade school was the father of Western science. And it was Thales who encouraged Pythagoras to go to Egypt because Thales himself had studied with the priests there. It's a myth that the ancient Greeks were self-educated geniuses who came up with all of their ideas by themselves. Many of them studied abroad.
So what kind of knowledge was available in Egypt at the time?
Knowledge of spirit, ways to prepare oneself for death, ways to reach higher states of consciousness. In my book, I actually introduce listeners to the Corpus Hermeticum, which were astonishing ancient texts from around 2,000 years ago, which melded the ancient Greek and the best of the ancient Egyptian tradition together. They talk about karma, reincarnation, and achieving different ways to achieve higher states. They talk about the guru tradition, called parampara in India, this golden chain of spiritual masters passing on this wisdom from one generation to another.
Where do you think it originated?
It originated, according to the ancient Indians, for example, it originated with the very beginning of humanity. The original teacher, according to the Hindus, was God himself. In other words, when people turned around and looked within themselves, they found these truths. And when we, let me give you the example of Al-Biruni, really jumping wildly here, but he lived around 1,000 years ago. He was a Muslim scholar who lived in India for 13 years. And he studied Hinduism and Judaism and Islam and various other traditions. And he said, you know, it was if you looked at these different religions, they're very, very different with radically different teachings. But if you look at the mystical traditions associated with these traditions, you know, Sufism and Kabbalah and the yogic traditions, they're all like the Eastern traditions. And I can give you a spectacular example of that from ancient Greece, if we have a moment here.
Sure.
Empedocles. This is the guy we were told in grade school was the first Greek to teach that man was made of the four elements. Now, he was a doctor, but according to ancient sources, his real interest was, quote, curing souls. So, well, what did he advise his patients was critical to their health and well-being? Well, we're told, Empedocles told his patients to meditate. I have several quotes from Empedocles. So these are his words. He said, "You must plunge beneath your crowded thoughts and calmly contemplate higher realities with pure, focused attention. Then a state of tranquility will remain with you throughout your life. But if instead you direct your attention to the trivial things most people obsess about, the silly nonsense that dulls their minds, then all you'll get are physical objects, which you'll just lose anyway."
That's beautiful, yeah.
Yeah. Let me tell you what, yeah.
What time period are we talking about here? How long ago were these philosophers?
Empedocles, so we're looking around 500 BC in that area.
So that's 1,1600 years ago?
That's 2,500 years ago.
Oh, that makes sense.
2,500 years ago.
So we're looking over a full age.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct. I'll tell you one more quick thing about Empedocles, because he's the guy who many scientists today consider to be one of the earliest scientists. Here is how Empedocles described God. He said, "The divine isn't something you can see with your eyes or hold in your hands. It doesn't have a face or feet or gender, but is pure consciousness, whose awareness extends throughout the entire cosmos. It is nothing but consciousness in every direction and eternally rejoices in the encircling silence." Gwilda, today we call this Eastern philosophy. 2,500 years ago, this was Western philosophy.
What happened?
Well, it actually flourished. It flourished and flourished up until about 200, 300 AD. Can I give you a couple more examples?
Well, we have a couple minutes.
Let me tell you about Apollonius of Tyana. Now, when we think of the 1st century AD, when we think of a spiritual master from that time, we think of Jesus. But Jesus was not actually that well known at that time. He didn't become really, really famous in the Roman Empire until like a century or two later. But Apollonius was the most famous sage in the 1st century in the Roman Empire. He actually traveled to India and studied in a Hindu ashram. We actually have records preserved by Philostratus. We're told that Apollonius studied in India and everywhere he went after that. Greece, Rome, Spain, Turkey, Persia, North Africa. He would tell people about the yogis. He said that they were the wisest and most amazing human beings he'd ever met. He went to Egypt, too, and noticed how incredibly similar the Egyptians' esoteric doctrines and practices were to those that he learned in India. He actually had this fascinating theory, Gwilda, that in vast antiquity, a group of teachers from India must have migrated to North Africa and taught this stuff to the Egyptians. Now, I'm not saying that's historically true. We don't know. That would really have to be researched. But we do know that Apollonius, who knew the Indian tradition well and knew the Egyptian tradition well, was blown away by how similar they were. And
we're going to have to pick up with this on the other side of a commercial break. Linda and I will return to our discussion on the flip side. We're coming to you through the X-Zone Broadcast Network. Don't miss the other fine shows and hosts on the xzbn.net. You're listening to The Science of Magic, thescienceofmagic.net. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka. There are more historical revelations to come, so don't you dare go away. Hi, I'm Gwilda Wiyaka. Did you know that shamanism has been around for 50,000 years and practiced by all indigenous cultures? These ancients understood there's more to healing and health than just the physical. All four levels, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, must be addressed in order for us to enjoy healthy, abundant lives. To find quality shamanic healing you can trust, you need look no further than Path Home Long-Distance Shamanic Healing Program. All Path Home practitioners have been trained and certified through Path Home Shamanic Art School, a Colorado State occupational school, and are handpicked, personally trained by me, Gwilda Wiyaka, to uphold the excellence of Path Home's long-distance program. Live abundantly. Schedule a shamanic session with me or one of my quality practitioners today. Call 303-775-3431 or visit findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Linda Johnsen, author of Lost Masters, Rediscovering the Mysticism of Ancient Greek Philosophers. Linda, to help us get us oriented, would you put the time frame, when was Jesus studying in Egypt, and when are we talking about a lot of your philosophers here? Do you think they ever crossed each other?
Certainly some of them did, and others did. Many others did not. I'm kind of leaping across like a millennium here in my book because I'm trying to get some of the very, very best ones in. But we have a tradition beginning around 600 BC and going through almost 600 AD when the emperor, this was, I think it was 529 AD, when the emperor Justinian closed down the great philosophical schools in Greece and Rome.
Why did he do that?
This was a time of the rise of Christianity, and if it wasn't in the Bible, then it wasn't worth knowing.
And how long was that? How long was that after Christ left? After he died?
Well, let's start it around 391 or so A.D. That was the real death knell. That was when the Emperor Theophilus burned the Library of Alexandria. And just a couple of just shortly after that, Hypatia, one of the great women sages of the ancient Greek tradition, there was a Christian bishop in Alexandria who was, we're told from ancient sources, very, very jealous of her because people were not coming to his lectures to his sermons on Sunday. They were going to hear Hypatia when she would lecture on the Neoplatonic tradition of ancient Greek wisdom. And so he told people that she was a witch and a criminal and actually sicked a crowd on her. And they smashed a bunch of jars and used the shards to rip the flesh from her body, and killed her there in the street. That sent shockwaves through the entire pagan world. It was really shutting down anyone who did not teach Christian orthodoxy. It was a very, very sad day because so much wisdom was lost.
So after the burning of the Library of Alexandria, it seems like they salvage some and put an annex in for a while?
Yes. They tried, those who, books that were stored in other libraries were recopied, or people from memory wrote down the books. But then some centuries later, the Muslims came through, and the library was destroyed, forever, basically. I mean, there's a new library that just started a few years ago, but obviously, tens of thousands of irreplaceable texts were lost. And we read in Plutarch there seems to be some knowledge even of the Americas, and who knows what other scientific and spiritual information was lost when all those libraries were burned, and the persecution of the pagans, anyone who did not think according to church doctrine, they were persecuted. It was actually illegal at some points to be a vegetarian. Because so many of the great pagan sages were vegetarians. So if you adopted vegetarianism, you could expect, someone from the Inquisition to come knocking at your door to find out what was going on, and you could be in very serious trouble.
So the Inquisition had a heck of a lot more than just burning witches.
That's for sure. Yes, that's for sure.
It was like controlling information altogether, right?
Yes, it was mind control. This is why we call that period the Dark Ages. Free thought and free speech was not allowed. But when we look earlier in history, let's look back to around just before 300 BC. Had you ever heard that Alexander the Great had a guru?
No,
I never heard that.
Mm-mm.
I read, numerous books on Alexander. I watched, specials on him on TV. I never heard this. And yet this is famous. This is a story recounted over and over again in the ancient Greek sources. When Alexander arrived in India, the one culture that he was not able to conquer, one of the first things that he did was send scouts out to find some of these yogis that he'd heard so much. He was really fascinated to learn about yoga and the mystical tradition there. I have to tell you this story just because it's so famous in antiquity and it's just so amazing. But his first experience with a yogi did not actually go very well. So we're told that the scouts found a yogi named Dunda. And they delivered this message to him from Alexander. The message was, Alexander, son of Zeus and sovereign of the entire earth, commands you to come at once. If he is pleased with you, he will reward you richly. If not, he will kill you.
How'd that go for old Alex?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The guy, he was homicidal. But here is Dunda's reply. One of the most famous in antiquity parts of the story of Alexander's foray into India. This is what Dunda the yogi answered. There is only one supreme king, the one who created light and life. This is the only king I obey, and he abhors war. How can this Alexander be supreme ruler as long as he himself is subject to the king of death? And what can he offer me when my mother, the earth, already provides everything I need? I have no possessions I need to guard, so I sleep peacefully at night. Alexander can kill my body, but he can't touch my soul. Tell your king that at the time of death, each of us is called to account for our deeds. Ask him how he's going to explain the agony of those he has murdered and oppressed. He can tempt those who crave gold. He can terrify those who fear death. But we yogis care for neither. Tell your Alexander he has nothing I want, and I will not come to him.
I love it.
And yeah, it's like amazing. And,
yeah.
and the, I just have to say, Alexander had the equivalent of reporters who traveled with him, and they actually recorded how Alexander responded to that message. And what Alexander said was, I, the conqueror of the world, have just been conquered by a naked old man.
I love it.
Yeah,
Oh,
we see over and over again how amazed the Greeks were at the yogis, and there are also stories about his guru Kalyana, which I tell in the book, and so on. It's like amazing. He took his guru back to Persia with him.
So, this looks pretty well researched, but it's not information that we get out of the schools. So, where'd you come up with this?
I actually took a course in Greek philosophy when I was in college, Loyola University, and my Jesuit professor told us, okay, skip these parts of Plato. Don't read this, don't read that, because that's Oriental contamination of the Western tradition. And so what I did when I started researching this book was I went back and read all the texts that my professor had told us not to read. So I was reading all the material in Diogenes Laertius, Diodorus Siculus, Arian, Stobaeus, the works of Plato, Aristotle, Plotinus, Proclus, Iamblichus, fragments.
Why do you think
it's all there? It's all there.
Why do you think these facts are so absently glaring from our modern day education? What are they hiding there?
Scholars are fully aware of this evidence, but they ignore it. They find it embarrassing that many of the founders of Western civilization were nowhere nearly as committed to materialism as academics are today.
When did that start?
That started around the time of the Enlightenment, so that was in full force, the end of the 1700s, going into the 1800s.
Let's talk a little bit about the new. That's okay. Let's talk a little bit about the New Age movement. It's not really new, is it?
No. People have always been curious about these phenomena because people experience these phenomena. Now, in ancient Greece, there was a real sense of rigor about this. They approached it very rationally. They wanted to understand it and classify it, and so they were open-minded, but they were not credulous. Let me just mention Iamblichus.
Linda, would you slow down your speech a little bit so we can understand? I'm starting to lose you.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Let me tell you, for example, about Iamblichus, who lived from around 240 to 325, something like that. He was really into magic. Now, I actually a couple of months ago went to see a movie, Doctor Strange, with Benedict Cumberbatch, and there's so many movies, Harry Potter and all these others about magic, because people, crave that. They're missing a living sense of magic.
Yeah, There's something I've noticed, and we're just about out of time in this segment, but now don't get me wrong, but there's very many profound and effective New Age practices and practitioners. However, there's also quite a few uninformed, uneducated dabblers. Do you see pitfalls in the New Age dabbling, and if so, why?
That's why I brought up Iamblichus. He has really good advice for people interested in channeling and contacting discarnate entities, for example, whether you think of them as actually real or as projections of the unconscious. According to him, some of these entities or energies are benign, but others are definitely not, and he explains how to tell the difference. He also warns how spiritual practice can shade over into sorcery when your ego gets involved. Real practice exalts the soul, not the ego, and is dedicated not for one's personal benefit, but for the good of all. It was they were very rigorous and careful about these traditions in antiquity.
Yes, in my training, which was shamanic, the same thing. The ancient traditions held checks and balances so that we could tell when we were coming from ego or personal agenda and when we were actually getting accurate information from source. It seems like that's lost. Is that what we're experiencing here?
Well, even in India today, they still this knowledge is passed on from the mind of the teacher into the mind and heart of the student. And when the lineage of teachers is broken, then the living knowledge is lost until someone else reconnects with it inside themselves. And
we're out of time for this segment. We're going to have to take a break. Linda and I will be back shortly, so don't leave us now. This is The Science of Magic, thescienceofmagic.net, the place where altruistic professionals of science and the esoteric create common ground for the betterment of our world. We're brought to you daily by the leader in paranormal, spirituality, and alternative health programming, the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net.
Gwilda Wiyaka's latest book, The Science of Magic, Book of Mysteries, Volume 1, is the first book in a series based on her writings that open every episode of the Science of Magic radio show. Drawing on the subject matter of each guest and armed with over 40 years' experience in shamanism, 35 years in alternative health, and degrees in psychology and religious studies, Gwilda introduces relevant and leading-edge information that supports spiritual evolution and personal empowerment. Rich with wisdom and inspirational quotes packaged in digestible segments, this is a book that will pull you from cover to cover. It will also serve as a daily inspirational reading for years to come. The Science of Magic Book of Mysteries, Volume 1 is available at our website, tsompublications.com, amazon.com, and wherever fine books are sold.
Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, bringing together gifted people of service to the world. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka, and one of those gifted people of service is our guest this hour, Dr. Keith Witt. He's a licensed psychotherapist, teacher, and author of 6 books, including his latest, Shadow Light, Illuminations at the Edge of Darkness. Dr. Witt, what can you tell us about shadow and projection?
Projection is taking a part of myself, and rather than being aware that it's a part of myself, say a part of me that is angry or that's sexual or that's very wise, it can be positive or negative, and projecting it onto another person and relating to them as if they're having that. Easiest way to see it in a positive sense is I'm with a spiritual teacher and I project my own wisdom onto that person, and he says something that resonates with me, and I go, oh my goodness, you are so wise, and I know so little. And yet, my resonating with that spiritual teacher is actually my own wisdom resonating with him that I'm not aware of, that I've projected onto him. It's a form of giving power. Negative projection is projecting something negative. I say I'm having an argument with my wife, and I say in a harsh tone, you're being mean to me. Well, actually, I'm being mean to her. But instead, I'm imagining her being mean to me, and I'm attacking her meanness rather than confronting my own anger and my own aggression, my own hostility. This is particularly egregious in violence. Violence is the source of almost all human problems, and what we do is we take our own violence, our own distress, project it onto other people, and then want to attack it. And so what happens with other people when they feel attacked is they will have aggressive responses, and then they'll imagine us being not nice people who are in a distressed moment. They imagine us being horrible people. They project that, and then this is where escalating conflicts come from, and that's where marital arguments come from, and that's where world wars come from. And to the extent that we can be aware of what's going on inside of us and how we project it onto other people, we can regulate that, and we can relate in a much more effective and compassionate way, both with ourselves and with the world.
So is shadow work dangerous? Can a person become overwhelmed when you enter into it?
Absolutely. As I was saying earlier, another source of compartmentalization and defenses is unresolved trauma. These traumas exist in us in many forms, and mostly in the form of, if we're stimulated in a certain way, we can go into extreme states of distress and distortion, sometimes dissociation. And so this is the power of consciousness and the danger. And so if we're dealing with any sense of being overwhelmed, it's always useful to be around a wise other, a spiritual teacher that we trust, a psychotherapist, that kind of stuff. And since we're all humans, we're born addicted to other people. We're born in relationships. We are the most relational species on this planet are human beings. And we're one of the only species, for instance, that we can have multiple attachment figures raise an infant. And so, when we begin to feel that sense of overwhelm, one of the best things to do is to be around someone that we love and trust, and that loves and trusts us. And so, in that sense, whenever we can have a culture around us of love and trust and understanding, we can go almost anywhere, and we should. Because the ventures into the unknown, into our own beauty and our own darkness and violence, that's what leads to transformation. That's what leads to that personal evolution that all of us hunger for, that self-transcendence. That self-transcendence is not random. It's going in a direction of felt unity with everything and service to the world. That's where all the developmental lines lead.
That's amazing to look at it happening at this time. If someone's interested in moving into this shadow work, what do you suggest is the first most viable step for them?
I'd say the first most viable step is to have a contemplative practice. The easiest ones are downloading meditations online and doing them every day. This literally creates the neural territory in your brain, the frontal part of your brain, for self-observation, and it begins to teach compassionate self-observation. And the second thing is to develop relationships with people that you respect and care about that seem like compassionate and understanding people. A contemplative practice and relationships with people that you can be transparent with and can feel accepted by are two of the biggest steps that you can take. Now, after that, there's all kinds of things. Regular exercise has huge effects. Healthy sleep and diet has huge effects. Our mind-body connection is a significant connection, and if we don't take care of our body, it affects our mind, which affects our spirit. And so it's our task to balance all of those things, and some cultures help us do that, and some cultures interfere with it. American culture, unfortunately, interferes with healthy living in many ways, providing enough support for infants and mothers and children. Americans work 1,900 hours a year as opposed to Europeans who work 1,400 hours a year. This causes stress, inflammation, problems that distract us and pull us away from development and love. And that's what we need, development and love. Mm-hmm. So contemplative practice and having loving relationships, and then allowing yourself to have an orientation towards life is about effort and progress and growth. The person I am today is going to be a different person next year, and what I want to do is I want to do the thing today to help that person next year thrive. And that's listening to my heart, listening to constructive shadow, and saying yes, and determining and discerning the destructive shadow, and saying, all right, where's the yearning? Where's the yearning in that? Where's the positive message? And dialysizing that destructive shadow, that perhaps projection, and turning it into constructive shadow. And this literally grows my unconscious. It grows my shadow. It helps me serve the world.
It sounds like you're coming out of polarization on the shadow level when you do that.
That's exactly right.
So Why do you think that we have such an opportunity at this particular time to do this work, to evolve, to enter into unity?
I think that the world is waking up. One designation of that, and there's lots of ways of saying it, but it's the integral age in that there's a level of consciousness that's world-centric, and it's not necessarily non-hierarchical, but it's like your Lakota teacher said, in any moment there's a different hierarchy that applies. That in integral we call that flex-flow hierarchical systems. That's becoming more widespread, and individual variation is becoming more accepted, and individual development is becoming more accepted. Now, as we do this, we're also seeing the shadow of this. We're seeing fake news. We're seeing authoritarianism rising up around the world as people begin to get disenchanted with the power structures. There are social forces that happen in human societies, for instance, the discrepancy between the rich and the poor, that are natural parts of capitalist economies. Now, that's not a bad thing, but historically those discrepancies have been resolved with violence, with war, revolution, and in a modern age, those are going to be resolved in other ways. It's messy, but it's better than war or revolution. And so in this age, we have room to be ourselves. We have room to affiliate and love other people as we want to affiliate and love other people with fewer societal constraints. But also in this age, there are dangers and risks. There are separations and distortions that exist that didn't exist before. And we're seeing that played out all over the world right now.
It seems like the old structures are falling down around us, and it's a very volatile time. Are you seeing it that way?
Absolutely. And it's a dangerous time. Nonviolent change happens slowly. Violent change happens quickly. And what, to a certain extent, what I'm seeing is that we're seeing, in a way, the death throes of the old social forms where coercion, violence, and authoritarianism were the corruptions of the human need to have position on social hierarchies. Now, the desire to have a position on the social hierarchy is an instinct, and so people want to be successful. They want to have authority. They want to have wealth. That kind of stuff. That's a natural drive. But when it gets distorted into having it at the expense of other people, then that's violent, and that causes problems. And we're seeing both kinds happening right now. And the solution is to wake up. It's always been fascinating to me that the number one thing that could change a culture most quickly was to educate the women in that culture. Why is that? Because educated women make better choices about managing families, and educated women will raise children that are more likely to be world-centric children. And I found that statistic to be hopeful, and yet then I see cultures where women are suppressed and education is suppressed, and it hurts. And that's one of the things about development. The more you understand and see, the more you hurt. The less you suffer, I think. Because you have that sense of understanding that we're all serving something larger than ourselves. But as long as one child on this planet is not being cared about, I'm going to suffer. I'm going to hurt.
Isn't that what it's about? It's like thawing out a frozen limb. As we become more aware, we start to resonate with the pain around us. Yeah. It's difficult in that way. I can't thank you enough, Dr. Witt, for being on the program and bringing all this wonderful wisdom. And we're about out of time, but again, thank you so much for being with us.
It's been wonderful being with you, Gwilda.
Our guest this hour has been Dr. Keith Witt, a licensed psychotherapist, teacher, and author of 6 books, including his latest, Shadow Light, Illuminations at the Edge of Darkness. His website, drkeithwitt.com. This has been The Science of Magic. Remember, you can always listen to thought-provoking past episodes on our website, thescienceofmagic.net. Until next time, dear ones, may you be blessed with knowledge and comforted with love as you dance with your shadow.